The Christmas tree was up before my daughter even took off her coat. She'd driven from Mississauga with her husband and the kids, 4 hours in the December cold, and I'd had the house warm since morning. The smell of tourtière was already filling the kitchen. My mother's recipe, the one I've made every Christmas Eve for 37 years. The crust had that slight crumble at the edges the way it always does. I'd set the table with the good dishes, the ones my late husband Gerald and I bought the year we moved into this house in Burlington, back when the mortgage felt impossible and the future felt wide open. I remember thinking, standing at the stove, that it was good to have the noise back. The house had been quiet for a long time. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter, because that's all she is to me. That's the only name that matters here. Came in with that particular energy she'd had lately. Quick hugs, eyes scanning the room. Her husband nodded at me the way he always does, the way that says hello and nothing more. The grandchildren ran to the TV, and just like that, the house that had been mine all morning became theirs. I told myself that was fine. That's what Christmas is. We ate well. The tourtière was good. I'd made sugar pie for dessert, and my son-in-law had 2 pieces, which is the most enthusiasm he's ever shown for anything I've cooked. The grandchildren were loud and happy. My daughter and I talked about her brother, my son, who lives in Edmonton and couldn't make it, and we talked about the neighbors, and we talked about the price of groceries, which is what everyone in Canada talks about now, no matter what the occasion is. It felt normal. It felt like mine. I should tell you something about this house before I go further, because the house matters. It's detached on a quiet street in Burlington, 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a maple tree that turns a color in October I've never been able to describe properly. Gerald and I bought it in 1989. We paid it off in 2011. When Gerald died 4 years ago, the house passed entirely to me. Clean title, no complications. It's worth, well, you can imagine what it's worth now. Burlington has changed. Everything has changed, but the house is the same. I am the same. I worked 31 years as a registered nurse at Joseph Brant Hospital. I have a pension. I have savings. I am 67 years old, and I wake up every morning and I make my own coffee and I read the news and I walk the neighborhood, and I am, by any reasonable measure, perfectly capable of managing my own life. I want you to remember that, because what I found upstairs that Christmas changed the way I understood the previous 2 years of my life. And once you see something clearly, you can't choose to unsee it. It was after dinner. The grandchildren were asleep in the guest room. They always stay over Christmas Eve, and my son-in-law had fallen asleep on the couch with the hockey game on low. My daughter and I were in the kitchen cleaning up, and she mentioned she'd left her phone charger in her bag upstairs. Could I grab it while she finished drying? It was in the front pocket of the navy bag. I went upstairs. The navy bag was on the bed in the second room, the one we still call the reading room because that's what it was when the children were small. I found the front pocket. The charger was there, and so was a folder. I don't know why I opened it. I think I saw the letterhead and my brain recognized it before the rest of me did. A law firm in Oakville, a name I didn't know. I opened it the way you open something that already has your name on it. The top sheet was a letter to my daughter and her husband. It used words like capacity assessment and independent living evaluation and estate planning consultation. It referenced an initial call that had already taken place, dated 4 weeks earlier, a Tuesday in November, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday I'd spent at my book club and then grocery shopping on Brant Street. While I was choosing between 2 kinds of olive oil, my daughter was on the phone with an estate lawyer discussing whether I was capable of managing my own affairs. There was a second page. It outlined options. One was described as a voluntary transfer of primary residence to family trust, with my daughter and her husband as trustees. Another was a referral to a geriatric assessment clinic, not because there was any medical reason, as far as I could tell, but as a step toward establishing a record, a paper trail. The letter noted that in the event the subject is cooperative, the process can move quickly. The subject, I was the subject. I stood in the reading room in my own house holding paper that laid out a plan to take that house from me, and I was so still. That's the part I keep coming back to. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was just very, very still, the way you get when something is so much bigger than expected that your body doesn't quite know what response to make. I put the papers back exactly as I found them. I took the phone charger. I went downstairs. My daughter was wiping the counter. She smiled at me. I handed her the charger. "Find it okay?" she asked. "Right where you said," I told her. We finished the kitchen. We watched a little television. I wished everyone a Merry Christmas and I went to bed. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark in the house I have owned for 35 years, and I thought about the past 2 years carefully. The way you go through a box of old papers when you finally decide to sort it, looking at each thing, placing it in context, seeing the pattern you missed before. I thought about the conversation 18 months ago when my daughter suggested, very gently, that I might want to consider a condo. "Low maintenance, Mom. You wouldn't have to worry about the yard." I'd laughed it off. I thought about last spring when her husband asked, also gently, whether I'd thought about getting my affairs in order. I'd told him I had a will. Everything was current. He'd nodded and said something about POAs, powers of attorney, how it was good to have those sorted. I'd changed the subject because it felt uncomfortable and I hadn't understood why. I thought about my daughter asking twice, once in September, once in October, whether I'd considered adding her to my bank accounts, for convenience, just in case. I had said no both times politely. I had not understood those conversations as a sequence. Now I understood them as a sequence. I am not a naive woman. I spent 3 decades as a nurse. I've watched families make decisions around sick and aging relatives, watched the grief and the love, and yes, sometimes the greed, all tangled up together in hospital rooms and care meetings and conversations in hallways. I know what this looks like. I just hadn't looked at it clearly when the person sitting across the table was someone I'd raised. She was my baby. She is my baby. She is my baby. I used to braid her hair before school. I taught her to drive in the Sears parking lot on a Sunday morning, and we laughed until we cried when she took out a shopping cart. The love is not the question. The love has never been the question. But love has never been the question. But love and money are different things, and the house is mine. I got up before anyone else on Christmas morning. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the early light and I thought very clearly about what I was going to do. Here is what I want you to understand about being a woman of 67 in Canada. There are people who assume your age means you are confused. There are systems that, if you are not careful, can move faster than you expect. A voluntary transfer is only voluntary until it isn't. A family trust sounds like protection until you look at who the trustees are. I had worked too long in a system built around vulnerable people to misunderstand what vulnerability looks like, and I was not going to become it because I was too polite to act. I let Christmas happen. I smiled. I made eggs and toast. I watched the grandchildren open gifts under the tree I had decorated. I held my daughter's hand when she teared up looking at the photo of Gerald. I keep on the mantle. I meant all of it. That's the part that's hard to explain to people who think you have to stop loving someone to protect yourself from them. They left that afternoon, Boxing Day traffic being what it is. I stood on the front step and waved until the car turned the corner. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table again, and made a list. The first call I made was to a lawyer, not the one on that letterhead, my own. Her name is Patricia, and I've had her since Gerald and I bought this house. She's in her 60s herself now, sharp as she ever was. I called her cell phone directly, which she'd told me years ago I could do in an emergency. I left a message saying it wasn't a medical emergency, but it was urgent, and she'd call me back within the hour. I told her what I found. I read her parts of it. I heard the pause on the other end of the line before she spoke. "Vivian," she said. "That's my name, Vivian. You're right to call. Here's what we're going to do." Patricia moved quickly. By the second week of January, my will had been reviewed and updated with new executors, my son in Edmonton and a trusted friend from my nursing years, a woman named Carol who I've known for 26 years. Not my daughter, not her husband. My power of attorney for property and personal care was similarly revised. Patricia also helped me understand that what the Oakville lawyer's letter described, a voluntary transfer, required my signature. My willing, informed, uncoerced signature. They could plan whatever they wanted. Without my signature, the house did not move. "They can't do anything without you," Patricia said. "You're not a subject, you're the owner." I wrote that down. I also spoke to my financial advisor at the credit union. My primary savings account was restructured, not closed, not drained, simply reorganized so that no one other than me had any claim of access or expectation. The one joint account my daughter and I had maintained for years, which I'd set up when she was in university as a convenience, was quietly closed. I moved those funds and I sent her a brief letter saying I was simplifying my banking. No drama, no explanation required. Do you know what the hardest part of all of this was? It wasn't the lawyer appointments or the paperwork or the decisions, though those were tiring. The hardest part was sitting with the knowledge of what my daughter had been planning and choosing not to destroy everything immediately. There's a part of you that wants to pick up the phone and say, "I know, I found it, how could you?" There's a part of you that wants to send the folder back to her by registered mail. I didn't do that. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd thought it through carefully, lying in the dark on Christmas Eve, and I'd understood something. A confrontation would make her defensive. A confrontation would turn into a conversation about whether I was capable, which was already their framing, and I had no interest in arguing my competence to my own child over the phone. I'd prove my competence quietly and efficiently to the people whose opinion of it actually had legal weight. That was enough. What I wanted her to feel when the time came was not a fight. I wanted her to feel a wall, a quiet, solid wall where she expected a door. That moment came in March. She called me, her voice doing the careful thing it does when she's managing a conversation. She said she'd been thinking and she wanted to talk about the future, about the house, about making things easier. I let her finish. I let the whole sentence land. Then I said very calmly, "I've already handled all of that with Patricia. My affairs are in order. The house is in trust as I've intended, with executors of my choosing. You don't need to worry about it." There was a long pause. "Oh," she said. "When did you do that?" "January," I said. "After Christmas." Another pause. I could hear what was moving through the silence, the calculation, the recalibration, the understanding that the plan that had been forming quietly for 2 years had met something it hadn't accounted for. "Okay," she said finally. "That's good, Mom. That makes sense." "It does," I said. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing much. Her husband's job. Whether I'd thought about a trip somewhere warm in February. I said maybe, we'd see. We hung up. I sat for a moment in the kitchen and looked at the maple tree through the back window. Still bare in March, just the shape of it against the gray sky. Gerald planted that tree the year we moved in because he wanted to see it change color in the fall. He said it would take years to really get going, and he was right, but he lived long enough to see it turn that color I still can't describe properly. The house is mine. It will go where I intend it to go when the time I choose arrives. The people I trust are named and documented. Patricia has a copy of everything. Carol has a copy. My son knows the full picture now because I called him in January and told him everything, and he cried a little and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." And I told him the only thing I needed from him was to show up when I needed him to, and he said he would. My daughter and I still talk. It is not the same. I'm not sure it will ever be the same, and I have sat with that loss long enough now to know I can carry it. You can love someone and still understand that they looked at your home and saw an inheritance. You can grieve that and still get up in the morning and make your coffee and walk your neighborhood and be entirely, completely yourself. The morning after that phone call in March, I opened the kitchen window the way I like it, just enough to let the cold air in. Just the line of it, the smell of early spring coming up from the yard. I made my coffee. I read the news. I took my walk. It was a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, and it was entirely mine. I've thought about that Christmas folder a lot since March. Not with anger anymore. The anger burned off months ago, the way frost burns off the grass by mid-morning. What I think about now is the sequence of it. How long the plan had been forming while I was going about my ordinary days, choosing olive oil at the grocery store, walking my neighborhood, sitting at my own kitchen table without knowing that the table itself was part of someone else's calculation. That's the part that took the longest to sit with. Not the betrayal exactly, but the realization that I had made it easier by being agreeable. Every time I changed the subject when the conversation turned to powers of attorney, every time I laughed off the condo suggestion, every time I said, "I'll think about it," instead of "no, and I'd prefer you didn't bring it up again," I was being what I'd always been taught a good mother should be: patient, non-confrontational, accommodating. I had confused those things with wisdom, and they are not the same. What I understand now is that kindness without clarity is not kindness. It is just a door left unlocked. When I called Patricia in those first days of January, I wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. I was acting out of something quieter and more durable than either of those things. I knew what was right. I knew what was mine. I knew what I had worked for over 31 years on hospital floors, what Gerald and I had built together over 35 years in that house, and I knew that no amount of love for my daughter changed the fact that a document in a folder in a Navy bag was designed to take it. Seeing that clearly, without flinching, without making excuses, was the hardest and most necessary thing I have ever done for myself. There is something that happens when you stop waiting for other people to recognize what you deserve and simply go and secure it yourself. Patricia used the word competence in a legal sense, but I felt it in a much older sense, the sense of a woman who knows her own name, who can read a document and understand its implications, who does not need to raise her voice to be heard, because the quiet action she takes in January speak clearly enough by March. I think about Vivian, about myself, lying in the dark on Christmas Eve, not shaking, just still. That stillness was not weakness. That was me taking inventory before I moved. That is what clear thinking looks like when the stakes are real. And I think about my daughter on the other end of the phone in March, recalibrating in real time, saying okay into the silence. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. There is a difference, and the difference matters. What I'd say to anyone watching this, anyone who sees their own situation somewhere in mine, the house, the account, the asset, those are almost beside the point. The real question is whether you still believe your own judgment is worth protecting, whether you trust yourself enough to act on what you see, even when the person across the table is someone you love. That trust in your own mind, your own integrity, your own capacity to endure a hard thing and come through it with your dignity intact. That is the one thing no document can transfer and no lawyer can take. The maple tree is starting to bud again. I can see it from the kitchen window when I make my morning coffee. Gerald planted it because he wanted to watch it change. I think, in a way, I'm still watching it change too. Some things take years to really get going.